Welcome to the third module of Social Media and Mobile Technology. I'll be covering chapters 4 and 6 in this video. Let's get started by reviewing the titles in chapter 4. First, I'll discuss simple and advanced measures. Then it'll be social media dashboards and advanced tools, social media marketing, employee sharing and new business, social media monitoring and social network analysis, electronic word of mouth in marketing communication, paid, earned, social, and owned media, or PESO, and social media audits and thought leaders. So let's get started with simple and advanced measures. The simplest form of review is just to check things like followers, connections, or likes. But that doesn't necessarily give us a lot of information about sentiment. Another strategy is to follow micro-influencers and see what kinds of conversations that they're having. One of the things that is required in the US is that if you are labeled a micro-influencer, the Federal Trade Commission requires you to disclose any financial relationships in commercial social media content. When we talk about simple and advanced measures, we can look first to the websites. That's usually where social media gets people to go. And they're looking at getting them to do some kind of conversion. Conversions can be something as open as awareness to an issue that's going on, or to get people to change their opinion. You might get people to register for an event or to be part of a listserv. You might also get people to purchase something or make a donation. And, well, we're in the middle of the US election, so you're hoping to get people to vote. One of the campaigns you could have a look at in modern media today are the Sustainability Development Goals. Not only are they pushing awareness, but they're tracking each individual goal online, and they're allowing people to use their frameworks, to use their media to track their accomplishments. It's a very robust example of conversions. In terms of simple and advanced measures, you should look very carefully at your website. So you should be asking, what are people doing when they get to your website? Who is using your website and why? What devices do they use to access your website? You learned about this in Google Analytics for Beginners. So you want to know if people are accessing your website from a mobile device or from a desktop platform. You also want to know what the top page views are. What are the most important pages that they're going to? What are the website goals and conversions? Are you meeting them? Do you use hero images? Hero images flash across the main banner. Typically, when you click on a hero image, it brings you somewhere to get more information. In this case, we have a button here. It says more, and we've arrived at this hero image website, and the conversion, let's call it awareness for this report, which identifies the Detroit River's ecosystem most pressing environmental issues. Also, you want to pay careful attention to footer pages. No matter what university of website you're on, if it's near the top of the main pages, you will see links to Contact Us, University Directory, Accessibility, News Services for Media, UWindsor Mobile Apps, Terms and Conditions Policies, and this one, Emergency Services for Students. So if you're struggling during the pandemic, you can go to pretty much any University of Windsor website and see this information. The textbook author noted that the footer pages were actually much more used than they would have thought. So if you have a website, think about what you're going to put in those footer pages, because according to the author, they will be important. Additionally, you want to review regional policies about accessibility. So for our purposes, the University of Windsor has the Office of Human Rights and Equity. So you want to check in on that. The website is here, and it gives you tips and regulations about what you need on your website so that things can be accessed. So for example, if somebody posts a picture and you are unable to see the website, you are going to hear an audio description of all the pictures. But that only loads if the person programming the website puts on a description of every picture that they load. One of the things that you want people to do and get involved in are things like listservs, so that you can send them more information. If you're holding an event, you want them to register, even if it doesn't cost any money, because then you can send them reminders, you can send them updates. You can follow up with them if they should have any questions or concerns. You can evaluate your communications with them, and then you can send them a thank you after the event. Additionally, you may decide to build a media kit that they can use. So that might be something like a Zoom background. It might be a filter for Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook. These are all ways to stay in touch with your audience. Additionally, emergency planning can also be very critical, especially in small communities. So at the University of Windsor, we have something called the UN Alert System. And when you click on this, you register, you put in your email, you put in your cell phone, and any other contact information of loved ones that you want. So if there's any emergency alerts, they send them out. Typically, they send them out in batches. They can send them out by region and by level of priority. It's really quite an advanced system here that we have at the University of Windsor. Next, we'll talk about social media marketing, employee sharing, and new business. The author talks a fair bit about how to engage employees in the workplace. Employees share their work experiences. You see league tables about the best places to work, the healthiest places to work. But employees, what they say about your company matters a great deal. This can get into some issues with the blurring of life and work. For example, when you are tweeting or Facebooking and you're using your Facebook, your personal Facebook, to talk about work, well, now you're blurring your personal attributes with all of your colleagues, and you may treat them as one and the same, but you may want them to be very separate for other reasons. So there is an increase of people measuring our actions and successes everywhere we go. So here's a good example, ShareRocket.com, as discussed in the textbook. They talk about the Social Equity Index. This is for journalists. And journalists, they go out, they have market share, they share their own Twitter channel. They're encouraged to share their own Twitter channel. And what news places have found is that it is a good way to gain market share. So they measure individual achievements on social media. You can imagine that this may be stressful if their work is being compared as market share and they're competing with their colleagues rather than working together to increase that market share. Sometimes when you are measuring social media, a lot of things go unnoticed. For example, non-business personal users as market influencers are not always captured in social media metrics. I left this video here about China and their surveillance state, and just to show you how advanced the surveillance state is in China right now. Everything from social credit scores to public shaming on billboards, and also checking in to see if you're saying anything critical against the government. It's one thing to say something critical against the government to your friend or a few people, but your social credit score may take a nosedive if you start to broadcast to thousands or over 5,000 people and are critical about the government. You may find that video very interesting. As people are measuring things, you need to think, in particular social credit scores, you need to start thinking about what's real news. So The Economist published this about the danger of deep fakes, and we see it happening in the current US election, where politicians are able to use the idea of deep fakes or the idea of fake news as a means to skirt their accountability. So I would recommend watching this and getting some ideas on what that looks like. One of the Module 3 challenges that I'm going to give you is that you will go into this website here and you will have an opportunity to play a game. In this game, this is a psychologist who made a game. He's out of the UK. So it is getbadnews.com. So in the game, they teach you how to give uncredible news stories, and they show you how to play the game. The idea is that, it helps to build your immunity to fake news if you see the strategies that people are using. So this will be the challenge, and I'm looking for your input on that once you're done playing that game. So I do recommend watching The Danger of Deep Fakes here. Next, The author does talk about social network analysis, and this is a very complex idea, complex area of study. I'm only going to very quickly scratch the surface about what this is about. When you look at social network analysis, you have a few different things going on here. So you have this idea of centrality. So this person right in the middle is going to have a very good centrality ranking. And then you have nodes. So these are all people in the network. And then you have these edges or links. And these links can be color-coded. You can put multiple lines to indicate frequent connections and communications. You can add arrows going one way or the other way to show broadcast or interaction. You can add color codes. You can do these networks by geography, by demographics. But when you look at a network from a bird's eye point of view, it really helps you to understand what's going on. I'm going to show you inside the University of Windsor Twitter handle. We're going to have a look at the Twitter analytics for the University of Windsor. I've been away for the past few days, and in my absence, unfortunately, there was nobody there to work on the Twitter account. And so here you can see we've had a dip in tweets, the number of tweets that we've made. Tweet impressions, that's just the number of times people see it. How many times people made visits to our Twitter channel, has that been up? Any times that people have added us or mentioned us, and how many followers we have. So we're up 164 followers, I believe. This is 7 days. You can also see top mention was this here, Windsor Regional Hospital. We've got our @UWindsor there, and it gives us a little summary for October. So when you're looking at analytics like this, oftentimes managers or people want to see, hey, what is popular? I find the top follower to be very interesting because I want to know, what are the most active Twitter channels that are following the University of Windsor. Next, I'm going to talk briefly about the Edelman Trust Barometer. So the Edelman Trust Barometer is put together by Edelman, which is a corporation that gives out communication information. They manage metrics for media, and they give you key insights. And these companies tend to work for large companies. They're contracted out. They're worth a lot of money because they can give the kind of knowledge and information people need to create positive outcomes because they have large-scale means to analyze audiences. One typical strategy is to offer free information about what's going on. So we can have global results over here about the Edelman Trust Barometer. And so they give us this free information. And typically, if you want more, you sign up and you register for more information. Keep in mind, they don't always disclose how they collected all the information, or they are not always completely transparent about how they collected the information. That's one of the key differences between industry published research versus academic published research. In academia, you're required to really spend a lot of time on how you collected the information and what were your research methods. Next, the head of Edelman says, peers and people like you are the most trusted sources of information. So we've noticed that there's been a lack of trust ongoing with the media and politicians. So now people are starting to only rely on people like themselves because they interpret the media and the news in the same way. So we tend to trust people that we know and that are close to us because we figure that they won't lie to us or they know the same types of things that we do. This can be problematic. When we start to talk about word of mouth, for example, how do you validate the information? Well, a lot of people will do it through community conversations, like on Facebook or in the media, where they leave comments at the end of a news article. This is a dangerous practice because you really need to learn to think about other perspectives. And if the only perspectives you trust are people like you, well, that makes it much more difficult to understand the experiences of other people. Social network analysis has a few key terms that you should know. So for example, a node is an actor or an entity that makes up the system or network, also known as a vertex or a point or an agent. So a node can be different things in the network. It depends on what you are measuring. Pezzo is an acronym that you'll see throughout the book. So it can be something that is paid. So this might be a paid advertising campaign. It could be something that's earned. So you've worked over a number of years to develop a brand like Pepsi or Coca-Cola. And it could be through public relation activities. So that may be like Tim Hortons sponsoring hockey. So, how did you earn that through your activities and through your brand status? Social, this would be like community building. So maybe you decide to build a community to give pro tips on something related to your project. Sometimes these are led by CEO communications. So they'll say, meet the CEO or speak with the CEO. Other times you're looking at things like what you own. And those are things like your website assets. So next, we're going to talk about earned media management. So one of the strategies to earn media is to review your influences. Look at their audience and analyze their content. What are they talking about? What are they interested about? What are they concerned about? And so you want to engage using reach and relevance. So you want to see how far this or that topic is going to go, how many people it's going to reach, and how relevant it is to them. You want to measure true communication outcomes and connection. So just because somebody follows you doesn't mean they like you. It doesn't necessarily measure sentiment. Sometimes people have the policy of keep your enemies, your friends close, keep your enemies closer so that you can keep an eye on them. And this can be very true in social media. So you have to ask yourself, how good is your integration of Pezzo? So your paid, earned, social, and owned media. And so when you're looking at how those elements interact, you're going to get a good idea of what strategies you should be looking at next. Review similar communities is a tip that you'll often get in social media. This is particularly helpful for SEO, where you want to use keywords. So if your competitor is ranking higher than you, go on their webpage, see what keywords they're using, what conversations are they having. What you want to do is imagine whether or not you can use those keywords to help up your Google ranking. The other thing is you want to review engagement strategies. So think about how other communities or how other people interested in the same things that you are engaging people to form communities. So they're having active conversations, giving their opinion, giving their time, investing their time in your brand or the things that you care about. Understand audience needs and wants couldn't be more important in social media if you're looking to have important conversations about whatever it is that you are studying. Here is a snapshot of uWindsor's Hootsuite dashboard. So you can get things like Sprout Social or Hootsuite, and Hootsuite will offer you ways to find what's going on. So you can look at your posts across there. You can also look at mentions on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter lists, LinkedIn, and it's all there. And you can schedule posts on there. This can be very helpful, and it might be something you keep open in a window throughout the day just to kind of monitor what's going on related to your social media brand. So let's talk briefly about the integration of public relations, advertising, and marketing plans. So there's a lot of moving pieces that you need to be aware of as a social media coordinator or as somebody who's working in social media. Some of these examples, we could call it media convergence, would be the use of email to micro-target qualitative relationships, best practices in social media measurement, integration of public relations, advertising, and marketing plans, step-by-step on how to do these things, and measurable outcomes and monitoring. We're also going to talk very briefly about SWOT analysis, SMART objectives, and reporting results. Email can be very effective. So if you have a group that's going to go to an event or You want to keep them abreast of what's going on at your organization. You want to have something called a listserv. There are lots of different listserv websites that you can go to, and you can decide which one and how much you want to pay and what plan you want to be on. But you need to be careful, because people have the right in Canada to unsubscribe from your listserv. And when they ask to be unsubscribed and you don't do it, that can cause fines for your organization, fairly hefty fines as well. So you always need to have an unsubscribe button. So anyone sending you communication should give you the opportunity to unsubscribe. So the privacy laws are there. I've shared that document. There's really two acts you need to be familiar with, and that is FIPA and PIPEDA. And if you look at those acts, it'll give you some idea of what your organization is required to do. Some of the things they might measure would be things like total opens. How many people opened your email? How many people did you reach? So were there unique opens? So one person might decide to open that same link from their email 10 times. But they would only count as one unique open. The other thing is you want to look at clicks. You can put in your email links to different websites and conversions, and you can see what buttons or hot links people clicked on. And you can get some kind of sense of what people were most interested in. The final measurement would be awareness about the clicks per unique open. So, for example, the same user might open something multiple times, but you want to know how many different people clicked on this rather than one person doing it repeatedly. However, if somebody repeatedly opens something and doesn't get the information they need, that can also provide you with some important insights. So effective practices in social media measurement. So one of the things you want to do is you want to learn to accurately measure sentiment. I see a lot of automated platforms that claim that they can do this. Oftentimes this takes a human touch. So you can look and you can train a computer to look for keywords, but you still have to program it. And there's also misspellings. So measuring sentiment is not a perfect science in social media just yet. So be very wary. And oftentimes they get pared down to positive, neutral, or negative into very broad categories. And sometimes it's hard to measure. So you need to make decisions about that. Your domain authority. So that you look at your website, your main web page, and you see how many pages are connected to it. Wikipedia does extraordinarily well because there's a lot of backlinks to it and they link to one another. So the more links you have, the more powerful the network, the higher ranking it gets. And it will give you more domain authority. So you want to look at what kinds of traffic are coming to your website, who's mentioning your website, and I have already mentioned this, the backlinks. So how many people are linking back to you? So maybe you run a cooking channel and some of the best chefs in the world are linking back to you from their websites. That would be a good example of a backlink. And the more people that link back to your website, the higher Google ranking you're going to get. You should determine the key performance indicators. Is it a conversion to get people to register for your listserv? Is it to get them to purchase something? Is it to get them to convert the way they feel about something? Next, you want to use reflective practice, so publish and discuss reports. So publish a report and you may find that people wanted to know different information. So it's a good idea to share that report with a few people before you share it more publicly with senior admin. But find out before any campaigns are run what it is they want to learn about. Include content analysis. So you're looking at what are people talking about? How often do they talk about it? When they talk about that, what are the main topics? Is it a positive, a neutral, or a negative sentiment? So when we talk about media, we can talk about journalism and we can talk about public relations. The two often don't see eye to eye. Journalism is trying to get the truth out, whereas public relations is trying to get a brand out. So they're not always truthful about, sharing information about their organization in public relations. So sometimes people can see public relations staff working against journalist staff. So one example would be Ralph Nader, who years ago wanted to criticize the auto companies, and he had a campaign basically called Unsafe at Any Speed. And he was talking about the way car makers were making cars without seatbelts, without, airbags and that kind of thing, and how people were dying unnecessarily. And the car companies were using the drivers as scapegoats. They would say, well, if drivers would only be more careful, then they wouldn't die. So Ralph Nader did an excellent job of getting the word out. And one of the ways he did that was actually coming to CBC in Canada, because the US media wouldn't publish it because they did not want their main advertisers to be upset with them. So CBC published this on their airwaves, and of course the airwaves go right over the border, and all of a sudden US citizens who were listening to CBC started to ask, why is it that we didn't know about these dangers? And next thing you know, the media had to cover it. So it was an interesting workaround and a good example of how difficult it can be sometimes for journalists who are publishing news articles. One of the things that they talk about in this particular chapter is getting opportunities to have stories published about yourself for the activities that you're doing. So if you're doing not-for-profit activities and you get a big news article on the third page, you could measure how many columns is the article, and you could compare it to how much you would normally pay for an ad on the same page. So when you're integrating public relations, advertising, and marketing plans, you can start to think about, okay, are our branding activities working, and are they getting us the same bang for our buck when things get published in the media? So for my particular job as social media coordinator, and keep in mind I just got back to this position after being away for 2 years, these are some of the things that day to day, I looked up other job descriptions, but here at the University of Windsor, floating around in the office, there's always some kind of new mobile tech device or camera going on. And so these are some of the, just to get content, the things that I needed to be familiar with. So you need to know how to work a DSLR. You need to know how to work cameras for shooting Facebook Live. So I've learned to use the Mevo camera, the Osmo camera, which is on a gimbal. In terms of editing, typically a lot of social media coordinators would use something like the Adobe Creative Cloud, and then mobile apps that are specific to your mobile device. You need to have interview skills, because when you go out and you interview, you're looking for a story, you need to know how to ask that home run question that people can answer and that you can make into an interesting story for social media. You need to have some writing and editing skills, and you need to have them on the spot. When you're publishing on Twitter, you want to make sure that your spelling and your style formats are all correct. Moderation of posts requires a really good understanding of audience. It requires an understanding of politics. It requires an understanding of guidelines for that particular platform, whether it be Twitter or Facebook, the guidelines of your institution, the guidelines of your internet provider, and also you want to look at what kinds of activities you may need to watch out for in order to keep your students safe. In my case, sometimes things are posted, I have to call the police, and then we need to help people who have been blackmailed online because they're trying to post things to the university website. One of the ways that you can often engage people is to do surveys. So I, for example, know how to run a Qualtrics survey, or you might run a poll on one of the social media platforms. Additional reporting, you want to know how to do qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative because you want to understand sentiment and conversations that are going on online. You would also need to know a little bit about Facebook ads, Google ads, depending on how much they decide to advertise. Sometimes you need to be able to write a media release, do daily news. If you have a blog article, sometimes you might be in charge of writing blogs or articles for a blog. And then event planning and support. Oftentimes, as social media coordinator, people would say, we're having an event, and they would give me a date, and then we would build a social media plan around that. In terms of a step-by-step of how to integrate or converge all these things, I'm going to give you some industry tips. So owned website, your landing page is so incredibly important. Having keywords there so it's easily searchable, making sure the information is easy to find. And you want to measure things like engagements. So engagements are critical to a successful campaign. So some engagements I mentioned earlier would be challenges. Maybe you'll have a competition, a contest for free concert tickets. Perhaps you'll be doing profiles. So sometimes I'll bring in a student and we'll do a short video and they can talk about what they love about the University of Windsor. You also want to look at conversions. So what are you looking to get people to do when they engage in your community? Additionally, A/B testing, that's where you publish 2 ads and you measure which one is the most successful, and then you run that ad more often. So at the beginning, you're going to do some sort of dynamic experimentation. You need to think critically about cost per click versus impressions. Initially, cost per click looks like it costs a lot more money. Well, it probably doesn't, and you, on average, in my experience, get more impressions using cost per click than impressions. But if you are looking for conversions, you probably only want to pay if somebody actually clicks and goes through with the conversion. The conversion could be a purchase, it could be signing up for a listserv. Native advertising can be very helpful. So you might write a blog article, and in the middle of the blog article, you'll talk about what a great school the University of Windsor is. Influencer marketing, this is for people who have a lot of followers, they've built up a lot of time, and they're the ones who might be unboxing the latest and greatest on YouTube to help convince other people that they should give something a try. So SWOT analysis, most of you will know about this if you're in business. So it's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So when you're doing a campaign, if you're picking a particular phrase or a wording or a strategy, sometimes you want to do a SWOT analysis. So what are your assets? What are your competitive advantages in your processes? In terms of weaknesses, again, it's assets, competitive disadvantages, and processes. So some of the things that you do may not be advantageous if you, it really depends on the campaign you plan to run. Opportunities would be opportunities for innovation, entrepreneurship, growth, and markets. And finally, threats, you're going to think about, if we publish this, who else is interested in this conversation? Are they just going to shift to the other conversation because we're just bombarding them with messages? So you can think about what your SWOT analysis will be to help you understand your campaign. SMART, so one of the examples that I'm going to give is convocation. So let's say we have a goal, and the goal at convocation is got to be specific. So you want to perhaps increase registrations with the Alumni Association. Might be a good key performance indicator. Then number 2, measurable. Count the registrations within a timeline. So you would be able to say, oh, okay, well, you just did this campaign, and then I noticed that we had 20 people sign up. So you want to attach that back to some of your initiatives on social. Achievable, what is the maximum possibility? And then number 4, realistic. What would be a realistic accomplishment given the constraints? And then timed. You need to set deadlines. So by such and such a date, I'm going to have, maybe 2,500 followers. And then that way, when you create these gates and goals, you'll have some concepts about whether or not you're on track. So you want your campaign to have specific timelines so that you can check in on your progress. Finally, reporting results. When you report results, you might do so publicly on your website just to openly share it, in particular if the campaign was successful. Oftentimes you might have to do that at the corporate level or at the C-suite level. So when you're doing that report, you want to know, what is the culture? What are the things that they care most deeply about? What do people need to know? is your report dynamic? So sometimes you set up a dashboard and you can say, well, you can go here anytime, and you might share that link for them. And then finally, you want to look at giving an honest evaluation, because it does allow for dynamic learning opportunity. I've also noticed that when you give a report, oftentimes senior leaders do not necessarily understand the lingo, so it's a good idea to check in with that and provide them with a glossary of terms. So that is chapters 4 and 6. I hope you enjoy the readings, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say about them in your discussion boards this week.